Hey everyone, today we have a very special episode for you. If you haven't heard, we've just released our second graphic novel, Where Nightmares Live, and it's available everywhere books and audiobooks are sold. And what better way to offer a little preview of this incredible work than by sharing one of the new stories featured in the book? Our second graphic novel, Where Nightmares Live, is out now, so grab your copy today and follow along. And remember, your nightmares are waiting. Today's tale is a classic, good old-fashioned ghost story. But before we dive into that story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in a compelling narrative format, then you've definitely come to the right place because that's all we do. And we upload once a week. So if that interests you, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Alright, let's get into today's story. On the night of January 3rd, 1804, a 22-year-old man named Thomas Milwood sat inside a local pub in Hammersmith, England, feeling completely annoyed. Normally, Thomas the bricklayer was an upbeat and social person, meeting his friends at this pub almost every day after work to share drinks and laugh. But tonight, everything irritated Thomas, especially his friends. As they droned on about the current local drama, Thomas finally had enough. Before he could stop himself, he stood up and slammed his beer mug down on the table. Instantly, Thomas knew he had overdone it. The pub went deadly silent. Everyone stared at him. Thomas muttered an apology, quickly grabbed his coat and walked toward the door. The pub remained silent until he was about to leave. Then his friends broke the tense quiet and called out, "Hey, be careful out there." Thomas simply rolled his eyes and said, "Yeah, okay," and stepped outside. Thomas decided he would walk to his parents' house, which was nearby, to warm up by the fire before he had to meet his wife later that night. She worked long hours, and when she worked late, Thomas would meet her at work and escort her back home, which was his plan for tonight. Thomas began walking down Black Lion Lane. As usual, Thomas was essentially one of the only people outside. Hammersmith, located on the outskirts of London, used to be a friendly and bustling place, popular with wealthy people for vacation. But recently, the town had been gripped by a string of increasingly bizarre sightings, or attacks as people called them, causing residents to stay indoors. Thomas thought the whole situation was ridiculous and that people were completely overreacting. He tried his best to ignore the drama, but it was getting harder and harder to do so. As Thomas rounded a corner, he nearly walked into two men heading in the opposite direction. When Thomas looked up to apologize, one of the men screamed, "Get back!" He was holding a club, and the other man had a pistol tucked into his waist, his hand resting on the grip. Thomas instinctively threw his hands up to show he wasn't a threat. At that point, the man lowered his club, and the other took his hand off the pistol. One of them said to Thomas, "Hey, it's dangerous to be out here alone. You shouldn't be by yourself." Before Thomas could respond, they quickly walked past him and disappeared around the corner. Thomas was only a few houses away from his parents' home now, so he simply brushed off the incident, cursing the two men under his breath for their ridiculous warning about the danger. A minute later, Thomas arrived at his parents' house. He tried the door, which was normally unlocked, but it was locked. A second later, he heard his sister Anne coming to the door inside. She called out, "Who's there?" Thomas replied, "It's me, Anne." But apparently that wasn't enough. Anne called back, "Well, I don't know if it's really you, so back up so I can see you." Through the peephole, Thomas rolled his eyes but did as his sister asked. He stepped back, allowing her to view him entirely through the peephole. He then heard Anne fumbling with the lock. The door opened. Thomas stepped inside, and his sister immediately shut and locked the door behind him. Her first question to Thomas was, "Well, did you see it?" Thomas immediately regretted coming to his parents' house to avoid discussing this tiresome subject. He realized that if he had gone home, He likely would have gotten the same question from his mother-in-law, who lived with him and his wife. It didn't seem to matter where you went in Hammersmith or who you talked to. The conversation was always the same. It was about these attacks, because the people of Hammersmith were absolutely convinced they were being committed by a ghost. It all started about 2 months earlier when somebody spotted a mysterious figure lurking in the church cemetery. Thomas thought the hysteria should have stopped right there, because just a couple of days after the sighting, it was figured out that the figure was actually just the butcher's son, who was dressing up in women's clothes and walking around the cemetery to scare his friends. It was just a prank, but the town's hysteria did not go away. Because a week after this first weird sighting, there was another sighting in the cemetery. A local chimney sweep said he saw someone walking around who disappeared into the ground. It was after this second sighting that these so-called attacks began in town. Late one night, a local resident was walking past the cemetery when something came up behind them and started choking them. The resident was able to break free and run, but they got a look at their attacker and described it as a phantom. Shortly after that, a local carriage driver, who had gotten out of his carriage for some reason, was confronted by a creature with horns on its head that came charging out. The driver apparently turned and ran away, abandoning his horses and passengers. By late December, there had been so many more of these strange attacks and weird sightings that basically everyone in Hammersmith, save for Thomas, was completely gripped by fear. As terror spread, Thomas attempted to convince his family that there was no way this was a real ghost. He argued it was just people's paranoia and imaginations running wild. But Thomas's theory was seriously called into question when, just a few days earlier, someone had died following one of these attacks. A pregnant woman had died. She had been walking alone near the cemetery when something rose up out of the ground, rushed over and grabbed onto her. She barely had time to turn and saw a kind of white flowing robe and a long, pointed white hat before she passed out. She later woke up in a neighbor's house, where people had carried her after finding her unconscious. She managed only to choke out the story of the ghost attack before she died. Following the pregnant woman's death, the town of Hammersmith offered a reward for anyone who could capture or kill the ghost, which was now dubbed the Hammersmith Ghost. The night watchman began extra patrols. In fact, those two men Thomas had bumped into, one with the club and the other with the gun, were on their own patrol. The ghost, and how to capture or kill it, was basically the only thing people in Hammersmith wanted to talk about. And it totally annoyed Thomas. The idea of capturing or killing a ghost made no sense to him because a ghost is not real. By this point, the butcher's son had come out and said, "Look, I didn't do any of these other attacks. That's not me." But to Thomas, this didn't rule out that the ghost was a person. He felt that there was just someone else in town, copying the butcher's son's prank, except they had taken the pranks too far by getting someone killed. At about 10 p.m., Thomas was inside his parents' house, sitting by the fire beginning to doze off. He thought about how little he wanted to go out into the freezing, cold night to walk with his wife all the way back home. He suggested to his sister, Anne, that he would rather just stay there and sleep. Anne exploded at him. "Are you kidding me? You're going to let your wife walk home alone in this environment? She's going to be the next victim of the Hammersmith Ghost. Get out there and protect your wife." Thomas sighed. Okay. He got up, grabbed his jacket, and walked outside. As soon as Thomas was outside, he was so annoyed by the current situation that he found himself thinking, you know what? If I run into that stupid Hammersmith Ghost, the person disguised as a ghost, I'm going to bum rush them and beat them up. And it will prove to the entire town that there was never any ghost. So Thomas began walking briskly down the road. He turned onto Black Lion Lane and immediately saw a large bush off to the side of the sidewalk. He could have sworn there was something or someone crouched down behind it, trying to hide. Thomas stopped and squinted in the direction of the bush. He then saw enough movement to confirm that it must be a person back there. Suddenly it clicked for Thomas. That must be the person pretending to be the ghost. That's the prankster murderer. There they are. Without any hesitation, Thomas balled up his fists and started sprinting toward this person. At virtually the exact same time, Anne, Thomas's sister, was still inside their parents' house. Looking out the window roughly in the direction Thomas had gone, she heard a loud scream that sounded like a man. Thinking, oh my God, it's coming from the area where he went. What if he's getting attacked by the ghost? She bolted outside. Just a couple of minutes after that, a large posse of men came tumbling out of the pub where Thomas had been drinking earlier. They were led not by the night watchman, but by the town's tax collector, a man named Francis Smith, who looked totally disheveled and out of breath. He was leading this posse. He took them down the road, and they turned the corner onto Black Lion Lane. As soon as they looked down that same road, the posse stopped because they saw a body in the middle of the road, and it didn't appear to be moving. Crouched over the body was a dark figure, hunched over the person. The figure turned, looked at the posse, and let out an unbelievable scream. The posse backed up, unsure what to do. But then the night watchman broke ranks and began sprinting. At the creature perched over the body, the watchman tackled the creature onto the ground and pinned it there. At the same time, the rest of the posse rushed over to the body in the road to see if they could help the person. Unfortunately, when they reached the body, they could tell the person was dead. The posse believed they had just discovered the latest victim of the Hammersmith Ghost and the ghost itself, the black creature the watchman had tackled. But they were wrong. When Thomas had rounded the corner and seen the figure moving around in that bush, it really was a person. It was not a ghost. It was Francis Smith, the town's tax collector. He was hiding behind the bush. However, Francis was not hiding because he was pretending to be the Hammersmith Ghost, as Thomas had assumed. Instead, Francis was hiding because he was lying in wait for the ghost. He was hoping the ghost would walk past him so he could run out and capture or kill the thing and get the reward. Francis was essentially doing the same thing Thomas was doing. The only difference being that Francis actually believed in the ghost, and Thomas did not. It was just Thomas's bad luck that he had chosen to wear his all-white work clothes that night, which to Francis, who was hiding in the bush, terrified and waiting for the ghost, he was absolutely convinced that Thomas was the Hammersmith Ghost. When the two men spotted each other, they both attacked, except Francis had a rifle. So when Thomas ran up to him to punch him in the face, Francis simply raised his gun and fired. The bullet hit Thomas directly in the face, killing him instantly. After shooting and killing Thomas, Francis had no idea it was a real person. He was so pumped on adrenaline that he thought he had shot the ghost but didn't know if the ghost was actually dead, and he didn't want to check alone. So he just turned and ran to the pub, gathered the posse, and said, "Hey, I got the ghost, come on." When they got back to Black Lion Lane, Thomas's sister, Anne, who heard the scream, had made it to her brother's body. She was the creature crouched over him, screaming out of grief. That's all she was doing when the watchman tackled her to the ground. Luckily, the posse quickly realized, this is not a ghost. This is Thomas and his sister. His sister was unharmed. On January 11th, 1804, Francis Smith was found guilty of murder and sentenced to death. But 5 weeks later, the King of England pardoned Francis and shortened his sentence to just 1 year. The Hammersmith Ghost incident was debated for more than 150 years, and it ultimately led to a modern-day ruling that says a person is allowed to use self-defense if they truly and reasonably believe they are in danger, even if they are wrong about the danger they face. The true identity of the Hammersmith Ghost, not the very first one, which we know was the butcher's son, but all the other instances, well, it would turn out it was the town's shoemaker, who confessed to his crime following Thomas's murder. He told people that the only reason he did it was to get revenge on his apprentices, who had badly scared his children by telling them ghost stories. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, We have hundreds of videos for you to binge right now. But if you're looking for a recommendation from me for that one video that's worth your time, well, it's this one right here. Alright, until next time. See ya.